Inside BBI with John and Eric begins now.
All right, welcome back to another edition of Inside BBI with John and Eric. I'm John McDevitt. With me, as always, senior editor of Big Blue Interactive, Mr. Eric Kennedy. Eric, it's been a quiet week. Free agency's kind of calmed down. We're getting now more into the draft season, which is today's show, really, with Dave Del Cole of Scouts Honor going to join us just a little bit. But first off, how was your week since we did the Dan Duggan thing on Monday? So how was the rest of your week?
Good. It's been fairly quiet. I think since we were on, it was funny. We were talking to Dan Duggan, and I think he was basically saying it's going to probably be pretty quiet till the draft. And he said, watch, as soon as we get off, they'll sign like a defensive lineman or something. And so they had a defensive lineman visit who has not signed. They've signed a linebacker, Cam Jones, who's more of a special teams player, but he did play with Micah McFadden for 3 years at Indiana, which is kind of interesting. And they got a long snapper now that only long snapped in one game last year. Triner, I think is his last name. And he's been around a long time. Kind of makes you wonder if I assume they try to make a play to keep Casey Kreider here, but he went out to Arizona. They didn't give him a lot of money. Long snappers don't normally get a lot of money anyway. They just basically get maybe a little signing bonus. So we got a new long snapper. So we have a new kicker. We have a new punter. So the special teams is completely new. We have they did sign a defensive tackle too. I think after we got off with Dan. So they got a defensive tackle, and it looks like they brought in another defensive tackle. So they're not done. And I'm assuming that some of this with the signings might be related to the comp picks. Dan did talk about that on Twitter too. So some people are saying they're not going to wait on people because of the comp picks. But again, this was what they did in Baltimore. Dan talked about this on Twitter about this is what they did in Baltimore. And so some of this could be tied, because the thing is, Schlottman's contract and playing time could determine the Giants getting a comp pick for Wandell. Now, again, I don't understand the formula, but the formula is out there, and it's related to playing time and salary and all that. So there is a comp pick chance here still for the Giants, and and why wouldn't you play the game if you can get one? So if you can get an extra draft pick, why wouldn't you try to do that? So.
And they're still juggling the salary cap. They haven't done any new contract stuff that we know of to free up more space. So they're still on the lower end of available cap space of most teams. Dan did point out, and we've talked about it numerous times, there are ways the Giants can create a bunch of cap space, but that also goes back to that almost is like their modus operandi, basically, of the last 5-10 years, that they always have to do that to have the space. And it's one thing when you're a top tier team, you're a winning team, you're in the playoffs, and you're juggling the salary constantly to stay where you are. It's another thing when you're constantly doing it and you're at the bottom of the league. That part is where I have a problem with. But right now you are dealt the hand that you have, right? Like, you have to kind of, in order to fix it, you got to get through it where they are currently. And they seem to be trying to do that. They're not really, at least as far as we know, jumping right in and automatically extending some of these other contracts or pulling money in or freeing it up. And they didn't trade Kayvon just for anything at the moment so far, just to get that cap space. So there is a lot of stuff going on there. I am interested, though. The long snapper piece is interesting because, like you said, he played like one game of where he long snapped last year. He's not young either. I think he's mid to late 30s.
He's 35. Yeah.
So is this really just insurance in case they don't get maybe a young guy who can long snap? This is just insurance for that ahead of time? Or it's kind of weird to go out of your way to get that guy now, because I doubt the demand was there for this dude. So it is kind of interesting, some of the things that they've done.
Now, there was some interesting tidbit that I picked up on with Harbaugh was on a interview this week. I think it was yesterday, might have been the day before, and it was largely a crap interview because the people asking the questions were asking stupid questions. But there was one point where he said they had signed 16 players this offseason. And then he said it again. And so I said, I'm going to check because I want to see. So I went to the scorecard that I keep on the free agents that they signed, and not counting the people they've re-signed, which there are a lot of them. They, according to my scorecard, they've signed 14. And I went back through it and I'm not missing anybody. So I don't know if that was a mistake on his part to say 16, or I don't know if they've kind of come to terms with 2 other players that they haven't announced yet. Again, one of those, we do know that defensive tackles. Now they signed Sam Roberts, who they signed, who had played a couple of years with the Patriots and then a year before, and then last year with Atlanta, who I guess he was doing pretty well with Atlanta before he got hurt last year. So I'm wondering, is there like 2 other guys, including the defensive tackle, that they've kind of agreed to terms with and they're waiting on again because of this comp pick thing? So I know that's out there, but I just find it odd as somebody as detailed oriented, organized, and as Harbaugh would say 16 twice.
Right.
You know, so maybe there's two other guys that we've kind of agreed to, and we're just waiting for some time to pass. Dan said something about, I can't remember exactly. I think after the draft or something like that, it doesn't count towards the formula anymore. He said something along those lines.
Yeah, he did say, I'm trying to remember, was it right? I think it is right after the draft that veterans at that point signed would not affect that situation. So,
which I didn't know if that's true. I always knew about the salary and how much playing time they got, but I didn't know about, when they signed them. So if that's true, so again, we heard that player visited, who the veteran defensive tackle had visited on the 24th, and he was even taking pictures on Instagram of him arriving in New York, and then nothing since. So I find that interesting. Anyway, so they are still making moves. People, we talked about this. We're worried about the depth on the defensive line, and they've signed one. They may have come to terms with another one. So
I threw that up there. Optimist does say after the first week of May, it doesn't count towards the comp formula. So
there you go.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I doubt, anybody can, but I doubt someone so intricately involved in what's happening would not know how many people they actually signed. So that may have been a slip of the tongue of something they haven't released yet. They've come to terms, but haven't signed them yet. And he's called them signed, or there's just a lot going on, and he just chose 16 and was actually 14. I doubt he made that mistake.
And the other thing he said in that interview that I thought was kind of telling was he said that he's been running in the Giants players, in the facility, in the locker room, wherever in the weight room, wherever they are. Now the offseason program doesn't begin officially until the 6th. But he said that some players have come up to him, and they've told him they've been talking to people they know on the Ravens to get the inside scoop on stuff. And he said they told him they've been like checking in to see what's Harbaugh like, and is he really, and they've all been saying, the Raven players, the Giants players, you better be prepared to work, and you better come in shape. And they're like, really? And I'm like thinking, what do you mean really about coming in shape and really working, really be prepared to work? And I don't know if that's Harbaugh just sort of
kind of boasting, a little boasting
or whatever. But if he's not, then that's pretty telling. As somebody said on BBI, and when I posted that, they said, Dexter, you better get your ass in shape, and of course we all wondered, we know that Dexter was hurt, but we've always wondered if Dexter was a little out of shape last year too.
Why did I get a Joe Pesci, My Cousin Vinny feeling like, you serious about that?
Yeah. So, and there was a thread earlier in the week about this, I don't understand why changing a coach really matters. The guy said, I'm a self-motivator. Does it really matter who the coach is? I'm like, well, do you think Tom Coughlin was a better coach than Joe Judge? Do you think Bill Parcells is a better coach than Ray Hanley? you know, it's like anything, a corporation, you know, in the military, anything, whoever's leading you, that makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, look, as a person who's now, this is year 12 for me of working remotely. The company I work for is in Vermont. I live in South Carolina. So I've been working on my own, and I tend to like to think that I'm a pretty self-motivated person. I set my own goals for what I'm doing, and I chase those things. It's important to me. But it does change when somebody else is in charge. Even just their focus changes your motivation of things that you're trying to do, not necessarily how much you will do, but how you do it might change, or what you're more focused on versus what you were focused on before. So hopefully that some of these guys, look, what did we hear? The rumor was this was a country club atmosphere under Harbaugh. And some of it does seem to have, borne fruit in terms of the fact that if you look at the whole, he's a dog, and he became his buddy, and the whole thing with him and Dart and all this other stuff, and some of these other guys, it just kind of seemed more like guys just did what they wanted to do, and Dayball was okay with it up to a point. But when they couldn't win consistently, that's when things started to go sideways.
Yeah. Did we say that Dave's coming on? Did we everyone might be waiting. Where's Dave? I don't know if when we started the show.
He'll be here shortly.
Yes. If we didn't announce Dave's still coming on. We told him to come on a little bit. So like 10 minutes in. So he should be dropping in any moment here. Yes. We're having Dave Del Cole from Scouts on our podcast come on. We didn't mention that. So he will be on. He will be answering your questions. This is going to be largely geared towards what you guys want to ask. So he's going to be coming. Coming on.
I'll answer Paul's question, but before we get to football, because I did bring it up, and I see Dave's coming on.
Yep.
We'll bring him on the screen in just a second. So where I am right now, the weight part is a little plateaued, so I'm kind of having to play with the diet a little bit. So I'm about 186, down from 206.9 when I started. This is week 13 of it. The workouts continue to be 6 days a week. I haven't started it yet. I created a second channel, which is going to essentially be a lot of stuff like this, but it's a lot of motivation stuff. It's other things that I kind of I'm interested in and want to get into, but I want to push myself to continue that track. Like I said, I am self-motivated, but at the same time, as Eric told me once, he goes, man, the second you put that out there though, dude, you're going to have to follow through with this. Well, that was what I wanted to do, right? Like if I'm going to say it and have everybody know it, I better follow through with it. So that's the thing. We do have a lot going on. I mean, it's not important, but we've got a lot of personal medical stuff with some members of my family that we're dealing with. So I'm trying to juggle that. I'm juggling my job, juggling this. So it's kind of hard, but that's excuses, which I don't believe in. So yeah, it's plateaued, but I'm trying to redo the diet piece, but the workout stuff's going. Whoever suggested in here the fasting piece, I've done that, so that I'm kind of incorporating that in. I kind of like it. And I actually we tried to do 36 hours. That was way too long. I could not do 36 hours of not eating. I made it for 24. And then I was like, I got to eat or I'm going to die. I know that's not true, but that's what it felt like. So, but anyway, that's where I'm at like that. So let's get Dave on the screen. Let's move forward. Let's start talking a little bit of football.
What's up?
Hey.
Where's the cigar?
I got him right here. Man. There's one that's been dead that's just been sitting here on top of my desk for a while. But if I had better ventilation in here, I do have ashtray because I have snuck a couple of cigars on stressful work days here and there. But I ran out of the little cigarillos that I was getting away with. So yeah, big boy would not be a good way to start the morning with the wife.
And by the way, you can't see it, but his shrine behind him is awesome. He's got a picture up there of the Giants offensive line from the 2017.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's one of the best Giants photos I've ever seen. You got it from License Plate Guy? Is that?
Yep. Yeah. Joe, I got it on one of his Blues Saturdays where he raised a bunch of money for charity. He's got his Spider game coming up at the end of May. You guys should check out. And he's going to be doing an auction at that, so you can get a lot of cool memorabilia. He's got like the coolest fan cave that I've ever seen. The amount of stuff that he has, and I'm a big poster guy, obviously, and he has a whole trunk full of signed posters. So I got like this OC Sacken McNabb from him. I've got a few of these from him.
Is that from the game where we got 11 sacks? I mean, the team.
I don't know which game that's from specifically.
Okay.
I could probably ask him. He would know. But the offensive lineman shot, one of his buddies actually took that photo. So you can't find that photo anywhere. And then he printed out, I think it was like 10 of them or something like that, and got all of the linemen to sign it at some event that he had at one point. And he only had a couple left when I got that one. I think he might only have like one or two left in the trunk these days. But yeah, it's a reminder for me. I have this wall because I mean, A, it's cool. B, I'm a fan, all that kind of stuff. But then also when I'm scouting, like I got a Shockey and Strahan right here. Hard to find Shockey and Strahan stuff, more so Shockey, but to have the two of them together in like the retro 90s uniforms is pretty cool. And then I got a bunch of like Jacobs and Bradshaw. And then we added the Jackson Dart Cam Scataboo, and then like the scat. You can't really see with the glare right there, but that's the Eagles game after he did the backflip in the end zone. He's doing the wave dance thing. But yeah, it's just kind of like a reminder of the good old days and positions and players that I really value what they brought to the table, and the offensive lineman being a rather prominent one, particularly around draft season, just remembering like where we used to be and where we're trying to get back to. Kind of good in a variety of facets.
Nice. Well, I know first off, for those who don't know, let them know where they can find all your stuff, where they find you on X, all that stuff. I know I normally do it at the end, but let's do it at the beginning a little bit before we jump into actually start talking about the draft itself.
And also just throw in that your fact that you're going to be on Rick's show too. You mentioned to me. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, sure. So I'm not big into the social media stuff. I do have Twitter X handle, Scouts Honor Show. Keep it pretty lean. You might, if you've been following it, you'll notice that like I don't have a ton of followers and I just delete all the bots. So that's why that doesn't like scale up as much as a lot of other channels. But yeah, I just post like a lot of mock drafts and stuff that I do on there. I retweet a lot of cool information. I specifically use that account as like a draft account. So anything I find from any of the media services or Giants fan accounts or anybody that I follow, I'll retweet stuff that I think that I found interesting, that I think people who follow me would find interesting. And then the Scouts Honor Show in legacy of the late Dave T. Thomas, who a lot of folks on BBI know. I met Dave T. through BBI way back in the day. That's available on any podcast platform that you would go on, whether it's Apple, Spotify, I don't know the other ones. I don't have a YouTube channel. I don't use the video from my show. Dave T never used the video from his show. So I've just kind of kept it old school. And I'm also not trying to like get notoriety. I do a couple of these shows with folks like you guys or Rick, like Eric has alluded to. I'll get to that in a second, where I show myself to the world, but I'm not trying to be some public figure. So I keep my show pretty well in the background. If you know about it, you know about it. I'm not monetizing it. I'm not trying to like grow it by leaps and bounds. Every year I try to bring on more and more folks into the mix. So we've got a whole host of shows that I've got to do in April that I've teed up that is going to be a gauntlet. So there's going to be a lot of content there as we're driving through. Try to start it a little bit earlier this year by comparison to previous years. And then, yeah, the show that Eric is alluding to with Rick Saratella of All Access Football, who produces the NFL Draft Bible each year. I was on last year with him. He and I did a pregame show each day before the draft. So before night one, we were on for like an hour or something, before night two, and then before day three. And this year he wants to go live throughout the weekend to provide more in-depth scouting coverage. And he wants me to come on for day three, because the day three coverage, if you all are nerds enough to watch the day three coverage, you know that it's pretty weak on the networks and they're doing all sorts of side stuff and like stump the truck. I get a kick out of the stump the truck segment. I watch NFL Network, not ESPN.
Yep.
But they do all these like random things that are kind of fun, but then you miss a lot of coverage on the picks. And the whole point of kind of watching a draft show is to learn more about the picks, particularly for fans that don't get nearly as deep in the weeds. And Rick and I I mean, I'm already in the depths of undrafted free agency, as I was joking with Eric yesterday. So we'll be covering through a live show on day 3. It'll be on his All Access Football, like YouTube, Twitter, X, all that kind of stuff. But those are normally the place. And then you can find me lurking on BBI sometimes.
Nice. Yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned the NFL Network and ESPN. Now that ESPN technically owns the NFL Network, it's going to be interesting. What's the word I'm looking for? Sad. That's the word I'm looking for. It's going to be sad when they get their
it was announced that the NFL Network is going to keep their own independent draft coverage.
Oh, thank God.
So that is solid. And I do, through back channels, know from folks that work at NFL Media Enterprises that they have gone on to extend a lot of those folks. There will be some attrition at some point, but a lot of folks that are being retained have already been told that they're being retained. So the wheels are pretty much in motion on that front pretty steadily, although media outlets have not covered it.
Well, as long as we get the fashion show and them grading the fashion show and
the red carpet.
Yeah, and ex draft pick likes to play piano in his free time and has a dog. I mean, that's all the important stuff.
Favorite kind of food.
Nice.
It's changed since the old days when it was just, just
bring
ESPN.
It back.
It was like it was just a 12-round. I mean, it was a 12-round draft, and you started at noon and just cranked through it. And it was awesome. And all they did was you had Kuiper and a few other guys, and all they did was talk about. But now it's like, oh, look what clothes he's wearing. It's like, oh my.
Well, they're monopolizing it into a roadshow, which was why Dave T stopped being involved with NFL media in the first place, and then Lance Zierlein took over. Was when they pulled it out of New York. He was like, I don't want to be involved with this anymore. Because you're turning it into a spectacle, and they're talking about doing it for the combine as well. I was talking to Mark Gorzak on my show a week or so ago, and I asked him about it, and he's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know what city could host it, but I think the draft logistically was very difficult in Manhattan. Radio City is in the middle of a lot of stuff. You're in a lot of tourist epicenters around that part of town, and I'm sure that the cost was burdensome and all those sorts of things. So I get why they've taken the draft on the road, but I really would love to see it go back to Radio City for 1 year. I think that it'll have to at some point. When that's going to happen, I don't know. Or maybe it won't go back to Radio City and they'll have it like somewhere in New Jersey or another part of New York or whatever. But yeah, Pittsburgh this year. I saw that it's already completely sold out. All the hotels, all the accommodations, the nightly rates on the Airbnbs are astronomical. You really got to be some kind of a diehard fan to go. I haven't gone to a draft. I thought about going to Green Bay last year because I have some family in Green Bay. Could have stayed with them. But each year, the cost is just absolutely insane. And I don't quite understand it.
Well, I heard they're going to cancel school in Pittsburgh for the draft.
Yep.
I had heard that they were going virtual, is what they supposedly had said, but they made go just because of the traffic and everything else. You are blocking off an entire section of downtown and everything around it. I went to the draft in 2002 and 2003. So I was there for when the Giants made the trade with Tennessee to move up one spot to take Shockey. That was a lot of fun. That was back when it was fun. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was in the Garden though then. They had moved, it was no longer a Music City. I believe it was in the Garden at that point. And I had a lot of fun. I met Mike Golick and Mel Kiper outside. They were coming in and they got stopped at security, and I was just standing there. So we started chatting, and I actually had Kuiper's book, and Golick was like, "You want me to sign it?" And I'm like, "Okay." Sure. I'm like, I don't really keep autographs, but that's fine. Yeah, you can sign it. But it was fun. Now it is such a huge, and spreading it out over so many days to really make it. Now they did one thing about the draft before we start talking about the players. They did reduce the amount of time now in the first round between picks. Does in anybody's mind, your minds, make a difference? Does it change anything? Teams in the past, they gave them 15 minutes, then it went down to 10. Now we're down to 8.
I think there's a running joke that they just force it for all the ad revenue that, I mean, like that was something that people have talked about so far. Everybody knows that Mendoza's going number
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Right.
But how long is it going to take for that pick to actually get announced?
9 minutes. They'll
Yeah,
spend 9
you
minutes.
know what I mean? So it's a money grab at the end of the day. They still need to have some time, but I think that there is enough frustration from fans on social media, whatever, barking about speed it up, and there's also people are tired, it's a work night. The first night, it's a Thursday. People got to be up in the morning and this thing's dragging. If you're penalized if your team's good. Now you got to stay up super late, which to some of us doesn't matter because we're night owls, but to other folks that go to bed at like 10 o'clock or something like that, and they got to stay up till 11:30 midnight to see their team pick, or they don't get to see it because it goes so late just so that they can monetize it more. I think, yeah, it's good that they're at least capping it with the 8-minute picks in the first round. Is it actually going to speed things up a ton? Probably not. I mean, I know people that work at the NFL and whatnot that have access to the direct feeds, right? And I think those are the people that are feeding the beat reporters, which is why if you're on Twitter, you can see a lot of the picks ahead of time. The real submission of the picks is happening in rapid succession for the most part, but they just won't announce the picks, or like somebody gets lost in the background, whoever's supposed to come out and announce it, and then they're like, whatever. Yeah. So,
and then
it is what it is.
People get mad on the site because the picks get announced
spoiled.
First,
yeah, right.
They're released. All right, I'm going to try to stump. Then let's get to the picks because that's what everyone. But I'm going to try to stump both of you. There was one team back in the day in the 80s and the 90s that would immediately put their pick in, like it would be like 30 seconds after they were on the clock, the pick would be in. There was one team in the 80s and 90s. Do you guys remember?
Not old enough to remember.
The Giants. It's the Giants.
Oh, no shit.
Giants would always run up and hand in their pick like immediately after it was be like, oh, the Giants are on the clock and they'd want to go to commercial. And that a lot of times that used to happen. The Giants would be the pick would be coming up and they would go to commercial and everyone would go, and it'd be like a running joke with Giants fans. It's like every time our pick is up, they go to commercial. But it was almost like the Giants were proving that they got their guy. So it was right. The Giants are on the clock, and it was when Tom Boyster and all those guys were there, and they would just run up real quick and do the pick. So it was always funny because the Giants were the one team that just didn't screw around back then. I don't know the reason. I just assumed it was because they wanted to tell everyone they got their guy.
And that mindset got us Thomas Lewis. So
yes.
Congratulations. Congratulations,
Eric Brown.
Good job,
Tyrone Wheatley.
Jeez.
All right, so I want to set up Dave here. Back in January, you and I did a podcast on your show, and you mentioned a guy that now more and more people are starting to speculate might be a pick for the Giants at 5. And I am starting to see more people put him high in their top 5. Like Lance Zierlein has him at 3 right now, but it's Mansour Delane, the cornerback. And I know there's a lot of Giants fans out there that for whatever reason, which I don't fully understand, are like, whoa, he's not worth a top 5 pick. You back in January said, yes, he was. I assume your opinion hasn't changed.
Yeah, I mean, since then, you guys know me. I try to look at every single possible option, and I try to convince myself. Like, I've looked through the last time we were on my show, Eric, I was saying Carnell Tate again, like I could understand the validity there. I've tried to force myself into the mindset around Jeremiah Love and that being a reality. You pick a player. I've gone through various iterations of trying to convince myself that could be the right thing. And anytime I'm doing simulators with any of these other players, be it an offensive lineman, a linebacker like Sonny Styles, who everybody's enamored with, and I don't blame him. I also really like Sonny Styles, but it's an incredibly deep linebacker draft. It's a deep draft for offensive linemen. The drop off at cornerback is so drastic to me, and Mansour Delane is such a premier talent, and he's proven it. And the way that he did it, going into the SEC and getting better, and they were throwing at him early on in the year last year, and then they stopped throwing his way because they realized this is a mistake. Don't do this. You know what I mean? And a lot of cornerbacks are kind of undervalued and then go in the teens or 20s or whatever, and they end up being really good players. And it could be because they got short arms, which his arms and Caleb Downs' arms are relatively the same. I think Downs has like a quarter inch on him in the arms or something like that. So people want to find things to nitpick about Mansour Delane, but the things that they're nitpicking aren't really relevant to his production. And then the other thing that you and I had talked about was his vivacious personality on the field. Really resonates with me. We haven't had a solid shutdown corner in a very long time. You bring in somebody, you want to build an identity on your defense. You got John Harbaugh, you got Wilson, you got all these new coaches, and you've got some players on the defense already. But to bring in a guy in a lethargic secondary like we have that could really bring a lot of juice and impact things day one, it just makes a lot of sense to me. And whenever I'm doing the simulators, I like the way my drafts pan out a lot more when I do go cornerback at the top of the first, even in like some sort of a trade down scenario. But honestly, I have not been trading down as much as I normally would this year because I think that the talent at the top, as much as everybody's ragging on it, like this isn't a good year to have a top 10 pick or whatever. I think the value is in the top 10. And then from like 12 to 25, call it, there's like this stagnant abyss of you're kind of reaching on somebody and like you might feel good about them, but they're probably more of a round 2 guy, but you got a first round pick. So you got to do something. And nobody's really going to trade up for a lot of those people unless somebody catastrophically falls. But I don't really see that being the case. I feel like 12 is kind of the benchmark of where things kind of get sketchy in terms of round 1 talent. Now, would you categorize those top players as blue chip prospects per se by comparison to talent in other years? Not necessarily to some folks, but I think the blue chip prospect conversation isn't as relevant as everybody makes it out to be. You know, every time there's a blue chip prospect, how many of them actually end up panning out, you know? And then how many people that aren't labeled blue chip prospects end up being the blue chip prospects in hindsight. So
well, what does it even mean? What does blue chip even mean? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It means something different to everybody. And it's a scouting term. I feel like a lot of media folks grasp on the scouting terms, particularly when it comes to the draft cycle, because it's something that makes them sound like they're in the know. And blue chip has just become one of those terms that have absolutely taken off in terms of everybody's got to talk about it every year. And I don't really consider it. I look at the players each year. I like the guys that I like, and I would call Mansour Delane a blue chip prospect, whatever the hell blue chip means to me, you know? But is he to everybody else? Probably not. The funny thing about Mansour as well is everybody's freaking out that if you take him at 5, it's a reach, but he's going anywhere from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I don't think he gets past the Cowboys at 12 if he were to last that long. And I don't think he gets outside the top 10. So is it really that drastic of a reach at 5? I don't think so, but the contingency of Giants front office personnel at the Ohio State Pro Day has everybody abuzz. There's several individuals, be it Downs, Styles, Tate, that they could go after. Reese, if he fell, which people are starting to speculate that could potentially be the case now as well. So is there a higher likelihood that they end up with one of those Ohio State players? Sure. But each year, the person I want the Giants to take is not who they end up taking anyhow. And it's normally somebody that would be labeled as a reach. And it is what it is. But Mansour Delane is an elite talent. He's proven himself on an elite stage. And I think he's going to be a great player in this league for a lot of years.
2 quick follow-ups, and then John, and then we should get questions too. So I just want to clarify. You seem to be supporting what a lot of people are saying, that there are only about, now yours seem to be even reduced, but I originally saw there were like, people were saying there were about 14 first-round grades in this draft. And you're mentioning about 11 or 12. So you seem to be buying into that. And I've noticed the same thing. Again, I keep hating to bring up the simulators, but when I do trade down and you get back down into like 14, 15, there's not the caliber of players that are there aren't the same caliber that were up towards in the top 10. So I think that's what you're saying is you think you're getting into the second round talent. And so is there a huge difference between someone that you would take at 18 and someone that you might take at 30? That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I might take somebody at 18 that people would have at 30 because I value that player's skill set more than like that general consensus that would be in that like 18 and 20s range. And I think that that's completely variable. You might see players going a lot earlier in the back half of round one that other pundits are speculating are more round two talent because it just ends up being kind of a hodgepodge of different prospects and it's a pick your flavor of ice cream type of an exercise where I don't grade players. I'm not Cy. I don't keep rankings and all that. Like I have a list of all the players that I like and maybe I'll get to the rankings portion as we get a little bit closer, but I don't want to be beholden to rankings. So I try to avoid that exercise and at least until we get a lot closer, but I will do simulations. We're going to talk about simulators a lot, Eric. So I don't know who you think that you're not going to be talking about simulators. But I will do simulations where I try to pick the whole first round, and see what I think makes sense for various teams based off of their needs. And I'll look at their depth charts and all that kind of stuff to try to make an informed decision or whatever. And I really struggle for a lot of these teams when I get down into like the mid to late teens and beyond until you hit sort of like the end of the first, because it feels like you're reaching on so many of these players. And that's where my trepidation comes from a bit more. It's derived from because, I don't have, there are 15, there are 20 first round grade players. I never really look at a draft like that. I just look at who are the players that I like, and then we'll see where they pick and, kind of fill in the spots from there. But I am more inclined to reach than most on talent. That's where I'm kind of faltering a bit on the trade down in the first round scenario, where historically I've been completely bought into it. But this year, a trade, unless we're trading down all the way to the bottom of the first and amassing an insane amount of picks, I don't really love the way that the simulators play out for me there. And I know that most fans would absolutely lose their minds if we traded all the way down to the first, but it's a matter of like, what's the prioritization of this front office and Harbaugh? And are they trying to produce immediately? Are they trying to build for the future? Yada, yada, yada. But when I do the simulators and I stay put at 5 and I get a premier talent that can be an identity player, that makes me like a lot happier with the results. And then when you hear Harbaugh talk about he's never picked this high in the draft and it's the opportunity to get a blue chip prospect or however he categorizes it, makes me think that he's going to want to stick and pick and get sort of like that particular individual that can really be like his blue chip prospect, that he kind of reshapes the foundation of the team under his tutelage with. But the one scenario that I think could make sense from a trade down perspective, if you wanted to get into that, I'll let you guys opine if we want to go that route yet or not. But
yeah, I do. But I'll say this, and I am going to be different, I think, than you guys, and that's fine. Like, again, like you said, I mean, I used to spend way more time paying attention to all the draft picks and stuff. And now with what we're doing and how much of the current stuff and in real life, we have other stuff outside. I have a day job. So that kind of stuff doesn't give me as much time as I used to. But one of the things I really think of when people say a draft doesn't have a lot of big time talent, I kind of think that makes the draft A, more interesting. B, it is more specific to your system and style than it is just taking whatever list of the best player, this best athlete. You're literally getting guys that fit the system that you play. And I like that a little bit better. And I like the fact that we have a coach that has a system, that has an idea, an identity in mind of what they want to be. I'm not married to staying at 5. Every time I do the simulators at 5, I hate what it comes out to when I get to the second round and have no third round pick. I hate that there's such a huge gap from there, knowing I need to backfill size on both of the lines. I don't need a superstar, but I do need guys who can eat up blocks or create blocks, make space. So where do I get those guys? That's in the middle of the draft. But if I'm missing a huge chunk from 2 all the way down to when I pick in the 4th round, now there's so much that goes by. I don't like sticking at 5. That being said, before we do any trade down stuff, you've mentioned over and over guys that you like. That's what you do. Give me a couple of guys you don't like that everybody talks about that you're like, you know what, for the Giants, that's just not my guy.
Well, I don't understand the justification of Jeremiah Love. I'll start there because we have 3 running backs on the roster. Are they a premier talent like Jeremiah Love? Whatever. You can make any kind of argument you want. That's the whole rigmarole with draft speculation is it's pure speculation. So
Sure.
Nobody's opinion is ever accurate, and it's just an opinion, and people getting bent out of shape, whatever, but the Jeremiah Love thing doesn't make sense to me. I think it was Schmelk. Somebody on one of the shows I watched this week was talking about how if you take Jeremiah Love and then he's getting 80% of your snap share, then you're kind of wasting the roster spots of Scattaboo and Tracy, barring some injury for Jeremiah Love that could potentially arise. But you can't go into it assuming that might be the case, although his legs are a little thin for my liking. And I do think that like an ACL could be a problem for him at some point, the way that he runs and cuts and jumps and all that kind of stuff. But that's neither here nor there. Can't speculate on injuries, but I just don't think it makes a ton of sense for this roster, given all the glaring holes that we have and kind of what you're alluding to around. We've got to figure out what the positions of real need are and prioritization that this organization is going to have under its new commander and chief, like if next year we're going to have a much better sense after having seen this draft play out, what they might be prioritizing. You can go off the historical Ravens data and all that kind of stuff, but it's still all speculation, which is what kind of makes it fun, but also kind of redundant at a certain point. But I just don't understand how adding Jeremiah Love is really going to catapult this team into a long-term direction. If they're trying to win the next 2-3 years and they feel like he's going to be the Saquon for the Eagles type of scenario, then I can see it, particularly if they want to be a run-heavy team. Like that's one of the biggest identity questions that people are speculating on right now is,
Sure.
Is this going to be a run-heavy team or is there going to be play action? Like, do we need a star second receiver like a Carnell Tate? And then it's really going to open up the offense because you got Likely and then you got Scat and, you could do a lot of different things. But Love is one that I just can't really wrap my head around. I don't like Mekhi Lemon. I just don't like him as a dude. Jordan Tyson's injury history kind of freaks me out. So if I am looking at a wide receiver there, Carnell Tate's the only one that I would be considering. The Caleb Downs thing is the other one that I struggle to kind of grasp. It's nothing against Caleb Downs as a player. It's just like, is that additive based off of all the holes that we have right now? And again, if this organization feels that he is going to be an all-pro Hall of Fame level player, then sure, you take him. I'm not going to be upset with any of these being the reality come the end of April on draft night. If that's the case, I can see the justification for pretty much any of them. Including even Ruben Bain, I'm not opposed to any of these options at a macro level, but then it just comes down to personal preference. And those are the guys that I would say I wouldn't prefer for this organization at this juncture.
It doesn't feel like this is, I got wood right here knocking on. So if I got wood here,
it's a weird statement. It's a weird statement to yell out there.
Take that back. It doesn't feel like the Giants can screw this up, right? at 5. I mean, based on the players that are going to be there and most likely are going to take, as you said, you can justify any of them. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to be happy. Fans always have their favorites, but if they take a Reese or a Sonny Styles or Eric Scottwood, if they take a Tate, if they take a Bain, a Love, you can make an argument for all of those. So it doesn't feel like it's one of these drafts to me. And I said this to you yesterday, and I don't agree with me if you don't agree with me, but it doesn't feel like one of those drafts like there's 3 players and we've got the 4th pick, or there's 4 players and we got the 5th pick. It just feels like there's not. I don't feel like there's a player that's being discussed or considered right now where it's like, oh my God, we picked that guy. Is that
there's a lot of options. And at this point, you have to trust Harbaugh. The man has enough credibility in this league that he appreciates and feels the strain of this pick more than any of us fans. You know what I mean? Like, this is his first stab at, so he's going to be taking this so seriously, and he understands the broader repercussions of this pick. So whatever he thinks as a super successful coach in the NFL is going to be the best player to inject into this team on either side of the ball, we have to give him the benefit of the doubt at this point and trust his judgment. And that's kind of where I land on it. So whatever he does, I'm excited to see how it plays out. Is it necessarily going to align with what I would want to do? No. But am I in the front office of the Giants? No. You know what I mean? Am I a professional scout? No. Like, I'm a fan. So what I want doesn't necessarily fit into their scheme or their identity or whatever it is. So as much as we want to like speculate who we like, who we don't like, and some people are going to throw remotes or whatever, I do feel like this draft in particular, like you're alluding to, Eric, it isn't one of those, there's a couple of players and then you're kind of missing out. That's where I think you get into the mid-teens and that starts to be the feeling. But there's consistently, 6 to 8 players that you could talk about for the Giants over the course of the last few months that everybody's like, yeah, I could kind of see that. That would make some sense. Or I really like that player. And there's a case to be made for each and every one of them. So it does crack me up. And we talked about this on the first show that we did around everybody saying, oh, well, this isn't a good draft at the top, blah, blah, blah. And then here we are a month ahead of destination Pittsburgh saying, man, they really got a lot of options in the top 10, So even the thesis around the player nucleus being strong or weak at a various spot within the draft is going to continue to evolve and change over the course of the next month. But I do think that there is a ton of talent later on in the draft, particularly in the trenches. And that is where I kind of get away from offensive line, defensive line in the first and second round, as much as I am a trenches guy. And a lot of folks are leaning that way of you got to identify the trenches at least in the second round. If you want to take a linebacker or a wide receiver or a cornerback or a running back in the first, whatever, do your thing. But you got to address the trenches in the second round. And whenever I do the simulators and I get down into the depths of day 3, there are so many folks on the offensive and defensive lines. And I'm like, dude, I could just absolutely load up here. And those are positions that we don't have a lot of depth. So I'd rather just take a stab on a bunch of those guys. I like a lot of the undrafted free agents on the offensive line this year that we could sign into camp, give them tryouts, whatever. So, we have a good starting set on the offensive line more than the defensive line. So again, it all comes down to Harbaugh's judgment, and we just got to have a little bit of faith at this point.
Before we get into the prospects on the offensive line, real quick, as a Giants fan, how surprised are you at Evan Neal and Josh Azudu both being back with the Giants under Harbaugh?
Josh Azudu probably more, believe it or not. Okay. Evan Neal, I get that from a physicality standpoint and early on pedigree standpoint, he's a ball of clay that Harbaugh could still mold, at a very cheap price, the cheapest price you could possibly get him. You look at like the Mekhi Bectons of the world or the Daniel Lele's of the world. That have moved around into guard and have seen some success. And Evan Neal didn't really get that opportunity as much as he was kind of teed up to be able to play there, but new offensive line coach. They must see something. I mean, Harbaugh, when he was considering the job, and then once he got into the job, one of the things he said he spent the most time on was watching tape on every single player to figure out who he likes, who he doesn't like, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, blah, blah, blah. And I can see Evan Neal not necessarily having a resurgence, but being a decent bet at a cheap price that has some familiarity with this organization for you to bring back. You got Marcus Bowe, you've got Jake Kubas. Like, there are a few guys that are still on this roster that could fight it out for. And it's not to say that I don't think they're going to sign a veteran right guard later on in the process, draft interior offensive lineman this year. It's definitely going to happen. But Azudu is one. I never liked Azudu. I never liked McKeithen. I didn't understand those picks. Those were catastrophic reaches for me that year of the draft. And there was plenty of other offensive line talent in that draft. And I'm like, dude, what the hell are we doing? I was throwing the remote for those North Carolina picks that year. But Azudu can't stay healthy. I get that, headlines, he flashes here, he flashes there, there's promise, whatever. But that one was more of a surprise to me than Evan Neal, because Evan Neal at least has some physical tools that you could mold if you can get his head screwed on straight.
And Azudu actually counts more against the cap than his contract's worth more than Neal's contract is worth coming in here. So it says a lot of what Neal, or at least his representatives, thought his opportunities were elsewhere. Because you would think a guy like him would be like, I'm not coming back here. I mean, this place has been horrible, but we'll see what happens. All right, let's start talking. Let's start in the trenches then. Let's start on the offensive line. I know we could start with the top. We want to not just focus on the first round, but real quick, is there an option at 5 if they choose the tackle guard? I guess you come either one out of Miami, could be a pick at 5. I personally don't think you're going to reach for the guard from Penn State at 5, but thoughts for you in a first round. Is there any offensive lineman that the Giants could squeeze in at 5 if they stayed there?
Yeah, I think Maui Noah and Vega Ioane are both plausible scenarios that anybody could justifiably argue for. Would I go there necessarily? I've attempted it, but then again, there's so much offensive line talent later on in this draft that, do you need that instantaneous impact on the offensive line when you have 4 out of 5 guys coming back, barring re-signing Greg Van Roten, and the offensive line had been substantially improved year over year last year? I don't know if there's so many holes to fill, man. You know what I mean? And we're not going to solve world hunger in year 1. So at what point does it make sense to hold off on that and try to get a position of bigger need, like a linebacker or cornerback, or a wide receiver, if you think we really need to air raid this out, whatever? I could see a justification for either of those guys being the pick, and I would not think that Ioane at 5 is a reach as much as many people are speculating. Like, the whole concept of, if he's the next Quentin Nelson, then is he really, a reach there or not, whatever. But I think that ends up being, offensive line to me factors in a bit more if I trade down slightly. And the trade down scenario I was alluding to a bit ago, and I thought I was really going to be the first one after this, because I did a bunch of research on it this week after I saw your prompt on the YouTube channel of what we were going to talk about. But Bobby Skinner actually mentioned it a bit on his show yesterday in his mailbag pod, and it's the Dolphins at 11. And he was talking about how he went through a simulator, and then he realized the Dolphins have all these picks in the 3rd round that they could play with. So I took it a bit further to try to analyze, like, why would they move up, whatever. So here's all the kind of details. They have 11 picks this year, right? They have 2 in the first, the second one being 30 that they traded Jalen Waddle away for. They have 1 in the second. They have 4 in the third. Wow. They have a 4th, a 5th. They don't have a 6th round pick. They have 2 in the 7th. Now, where it gets interesting is the new regime in Miami is the legacy Packers regime. You have John Eric Sullivan, who was with the Packers for God knows how long as a director of player personnel. I feel like 20 something years or whatever he is with that organization. And Jeff Hafley, who's the new head coach, right? The Packers have traded up multiple times in the first round in recent memory. So in 2018, they traded up for Jair Alexander, cornerback. In 2019, they traded up for Darnell Savage, safety. 2020 traded up for quarterback Jordan Love. 2023 traded up for defensive end Lucas Van Ness. So they're not bashful about trading up. They also traded premium draft capital to acquire Micah Parsons. So if there's anything that we can kind of pull from there, like we are with John Harbaugh's organization coming over from the Ravens and how they treated things, it's they could get aggressive. They have a lot of ammo in the tank. They've got a rather lackluster team. And I think it's particularly interesting that they traded away Minka Fitzpatrick, their all-pro safety, for pennies on the dollar because they needed cap space. But if you go and look at it, John Eric Sullivan was in attendance at the Ohio State Pro Day. So the Dolphins GM was at the Pro Day for Ohio State. And the only Ohio State player they've had a visit with so far that I could find is Caden McDonald, the nose tackle out of Ohio State, which could feasibly be in play for them at their 30th overall pick, right? However, the Dolphins just drafted last year in the first round Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, who also happens to be an enormous nose tackle. So I can't quite wrap my head around the justification of taking another nose tackle in sequential years. Even if they don't like him, it's just they have him on a rookie deal, blah, blah, blah. So is that a smokescreen in a way to potentially get them in the building to look at somebody like a Tate to replace a Waddle or Downs to replace a Fitzpatrick? If you do the analysis, you'll find out that Downs is like the prototype for Hafley's defense. And that could be the scenario where a team would move up. If they feel like Downs is a legitimate consideration for the Giants at 5, they have enough ammo in the tank. They have a history of trading up philosophically from the organization where they came from, that I could see them trying to, similar how we're talking about like John Harbaugh building an identity and having like that first stab of like, this is going to be my guy. This is the physicality. This is the foundation that I want to build off of. I could see Hafley trying to land Caleb Downs, but that's the most logical trade scenario I could find where you still stay within, arm's reach to be able to get one of these other players that we've talked about, particularly like Iowani, the guard from Penn State, where I think it would be a lot more justified than you're getting ahead of some of the other teams where he's projected to go there. But you could also trade down with their 30th pick and amass a ton of their draft capital and then have a bazillion picks, which is not going to happen. So before everybody starts shooting me over that one, let's relax. But, fun to consider. You got to consider options.
I saw the thing. I saw the thing with Bobby Skinner. So not to knock it, but I am going to take the other side of this.
Sure.
The Dolphins are massively in cap hell. They're eating a shit ton of money from Tua. They moved on from Waddle. That was a lot of money. They had to take they're basically taking picks, not getting players back because they can't take on salary.
They have $179 million in dead cap this year.
They're gonna have to add players in numbers, in droves, that are going to be cheap on the cap for at least a couple of years. I can't imagine them giving up that space to move up, which also does, even though it's slotted, it does increase the value of that player based on the slot of where you get them. They're going to have to juggle those numbers completely. I see why it makes sense in terms of number of picks, but just like we're always projecting what, as you said, what Harbaugh might do because of the Ravens thing, if you're only projecting on what the Packers did, that's great. But if you don't take into account the cap situation and everything else with the Dolphins right now, which, by the way, they've traded away all of their playmakers, essentially gotten rid of all their playmakers, but they signed a quarterback to come in who really has very limited actual on the field game tape that says this guy is worth the money that they're giving him. Yep. And you give him no weapons. I think they're going to have to draft in plenty. I can't imagine that they would be the move up candidate, but that makes sense based on the number of picks. I just don't see it happening.
And that's why I have not traded down much in the simulators this year, because I don't see a trade down being realistic. But when I went through the various teams and the needs, like their secondary is abysmal. I mean, way worse than ours. They actually have some decent players at some spots. Linebacker is one that they have a huge hole in. Wide receiver, they signed a couple of street free agents. Their offensive line isn't completely abysmal. They have Devon A-Chain. Would they want Jeremiah Love? Because Devon A-Chain is perpetually hurt over there, and then that takes a little bit off of Malik Willis's plate.
Right.
The Dolphins just seemed like if anybody was going to be desperate and give up draft capital, they have the draft capital. They're trying to build a new identity. So it could make the most sense, but I agree with you that it's still a far-fetched concept. But when you started to dig into it a little bit more, it had more legs than I initially thought. But I do think at the end of the day, the Giants will end up sticking and picking at 5.
All right, so let's. Oh, go ahead.
Throw out. So, guys in chat, start throwing out your questions. If you had something towards the beginning and we missed it, just repost it, because there's a lot of comments since we started. So, if you've got questions for Dave, just start posting them.
I know there was one for Dave about Love, but you pretty much answered it already. So
okay. I will say, because normally I'm one of the guys in chat. For folks in chat, it is so hard to keep up with the freaking chat when you're actually trying to stay engaged in the conversation. Because as much as I want to be reading the chat, I'm trying to process my own thoughts or listen to these other guys talk. And it's incredibly difficult to keep up with the chat. So yeah, please recirculate the questions, because I've probably read 2 lines of the chat this entire time so far.
It is interesting. So I will say I did, and I think he's in chat right now. I did take a shot, because you'll see that I sometimes look down. It's not that I'm not paying attention.
Yeah,
I'm literally
somebody's got to do it.
I'm trying to keep track of the chat, but I also every now and then will just check to see if anything new has been put out there that we need to talk about. So that's what I keep checking. But anyway, that just that's out there. Offensive line, you had mentioned deep for you. There's some players a little bit deeper. Real quick, and then we'll get to the best player there. Who do you like? Say you start getting past the second round, third round, fourth round. Doesn't matter whether it's tackle, guard, center. I don't care. Who's kind of that guy that next guy in those mid rounds that you like? Man, I'd like to get that guy on our offensive line.
Oof, loaded question. There's a lot of names that I could walk through with you on that front, but if I had to pick one, and it's tough not having the third round pick, but Keelan Rutledge probably makes the most sense from an identity, physicality standpoint, what this team needs in an offensive guard, all that kind of stuff. He would be sort of that mid-tier guy that, I think he'll go earlier than a lot of people are speculating. So you might have to take him with your second round pick, as much as people might categorize that as a reach by comparison to the Pregnons or the Basantis, some of the other people that might be available at the top of the second. I like Jennings Dunker a good bit as well. So one of those 2 guys fill an immediate need. I like their swagger. I like their skill set. I like the identity that they bring to the table. So high level way of answering your question, probably one of those 2 guys, but you'd probably have to take him in the second unless you trade down, because I think that they could both realistically go in the third, but we don't have that pick. So it's difficult to manipulate how you would acquire those guys without a reach at this point.
So let's do Stephen Kaufman's question for you. Regardless of position, regardless of whether they could be there for the Giants, who's the best player for you, the best player in the draft?
Again, you guys are hitting me. This is where not having rankings, I'm having to kind of assess these things in real time. But I think Sonny Styles is probably the most can't miss prospect in this draft. Everything about him just screams yes, so is he going to have the highest upside potentially? Not necessarily, but is he a surefire, I could put all my chips on the table and say, I know he is going to be successful for 10 years in this league? 100%. I think, Mansour Delane is in the top 3 for me easily. And then if I'm rounding out a top 3, it's hard to get away from Ruben Bain, man. It really is. I mean, again, you speculate on the arm length and like all that kind of nonsense, but you can't argue the production, and that's what it comes down to for me is when you put on the tape, which it's easier for some of these other players. Like I don't watch the all 22 and every single college game. I don't watch a lot of college football, to be quite honest with you guys, as a lot of you know, if you've been listening to me for the last few years. But watching like offensive linemen, I mean, Maui Noah is a great talent, but I don't know that he would probably be like borderline 4 there for me. But I'm not as high on like David Bailey, Arbel Reese. I don't know if he has like a natural home. So like some of these other guys that you would conceivably have in the top 5 of the draft, they have warts as far as I would be concerned. So gun to my head right now, I would probably say Sonny Styles.
Nice. All right. Fair enough. I like that. The thing with Styles for me though is I do wonder, is it going to be one of those spots that it kind of depends on when the team gets him or where they try to force him immediately? He seems to be this just great all-around athletic talent that some teams might go, I'm just going to put him outside. I think he could rush the passer. We're just going to put him outside. And then he starts to maybe do that a little bit. And they're like, we'll move back inside. I think you kind of have to let him, you're going to use his athletic piece around the chessboard more until you can really figure out 100% this is the position that seems to be best for him. But I like him a lot. I think a lot of people think he's overrated. I've seen it in chat that they think Styles is overrated. I think Arvell Reese is overrated. I think Arvell Reese to me is a guy that in a couple of other drafts, I mean, he could literally be Kayvon in a way that he comes in with this expectation and he's, he might get you 3-4 sacks and he plays the run fairly well, but nothing that stands out to you at the end of the day that really justified a top 5 pick.
Yeah, I think the thing that hurts Sonny Styles, if he came out in any other year where it wasn't an incredible linebacker crop, completely different scenario for him. But where I struggle with him is the amount of linebackers in this draft that I feel like can come in and contribute. And is there as much of like a drastic drop off a cliff in talent? Like, I really like Anthony Hill, as a lot of you guys know. Jacob Rodriguez is an absolute Tasmanian devil out there, Josiah Trotter. A lot of people like CJ Allen. I'm not like completely convinced there, but you've got so many players, and even into day 3, linebackers that I think can contribute and become starters. A lot of quality linebackers end up going on day 3 because that position isn't prioritized as much. And then the other argument being that linebackers are incredibly cheap in free agency. They're going for pennies on the dollar compared to, I think it's probably like the most underpaid position in free agency if I really had to speculate. So how do you justify taking an off-ball? I think he is an off-ball linebacker, but how do you justify taking somebody that high at a position where you can get a cheap quality alternative in free agency like we did with Edmonds out of Chicago, are they going to, or Bobby Okereke, or go back even Antonio Pierce, you know what I mean? Like linebackers are available in free agency. So as fantastic of a prospect as he is, I think the depth of this class and how cheap they are in free agency hurts the argument to take him that high. And linebackers have historically fallen more so than safeties even. I remember a couple years back when the Detroit Lions took Jack Campbell in the teens, and everybody was like, dude, what the hell? Because Jack Campbell was a day 2 pick. Some people had him in the 2nd round. A lot of people had him in the 3rd round. Then he ends up going in the teens, and everybody's like, whoa, dude, But Dan Campbell and that organization, they wanted that, And I think that the Ravens historically and Harbaugh, they want that. And Sonny Styles is leaps and bounds above everybody else, but there is so much talent available at that position this year that when you're doing simulators and you're seeing the talent you can get in the second round, the fourth round, the fifth round, and you start off with a linebacker, like wide receiver or offensive lineman, like there are so many players that I'm happy to take. And there's so many options that even if like the one guy you really want right there isn't there, there's going to be 2 to 3 others that you have in a similar tier later on in the draft at these various positions that if you're trying to strategically manipulate the draft in an advantageous way to fill your needs, like I philosophically would, it's hard to justify going that route so early on.
Well, we know the Ravens value middle linebackers, but we also know you looked into this, Cy looked into this too. The draft history of the Ravens is they take defensive backs early. And it seems like that's the area that they've hit hard. So again, that suggests, again, we don't know exactly what Harbaugh is going to do without Ozzie Newsome and without the Costa, but we're operating on the assumption that he had a big role in those picks. So that would argue again that, again, don't write off Mansour Delane, don't write off Caleb Downs if you believe there's a history there in terms of replicating what the Ravens did. So now we have a question here. I know you and I have talked about this, but obviously people haven't heard about your thoughts on the defensive tackle class. But if I understand you correctly, again, this is one of those areas where you think there's some decent depth if going into day 3 at that position. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. But
no, for sure, man. And look, I completely appreciate that our defensive line unit, and I mean, you guys know, because I've been saying it year over year since I got into this podcast game, like the trenches are a disaster zone. It's a wasteland for us the last several years, and we lack depth. And could you add a premier talent earlier on? Defensive tackle, everybody's kind of speculating at the top of round 2, which I get. And if a Peter Woods or a Caden McDonald, Christian Miller, a guy that they are bringing in for a 30 visit now,
Right. Yep.
A lot of people like Lee Hunter out of Texas Tech, Caleb Banks, if he didn't have the foot surgery, would be in that conversation as well. So there is a solid crop of talent at the top of the second round, but I also like a lot of the guys that I could get in the mid-late rounds, like Big Citrus, Dom Orange from Iowa State, Darrell Jackson from Florida State. Chris McClellan is a guy who hasn't been talked about enough as far as I'm concerned out of Missouri. Tim Keenan, a little bit of a sawed-off guy from Alabama. I'm really high on DeMonte Capehart out of Clemson. People like Rayshon Benny out of Michigan. There's a kid out of Georgia Tech. Everybody, we're talking about Keelan Rutledge out of that program, but Jordan Vandenberg is a guy that has absolutely annihilated the pre-draft process, and people aren't talking about him. There's Cameron Ball out of Arkansas, huge guy. Devin Eastern, another huge guy out of Minnesota. And then you start to get into like the speculative UDFA kind of a category as far as I'd be concerned, because we don't have a 7th round pick. But David Blay out of Miami, a guy out of SMU that I have been pounding the table for a little bit so far, Jeffrey Ba, MBA. I don't know how the hell you pronounce that, but here's a tall guy, bats down balls at the line of scrimmage. A little bit raw, but I think he's got a lot of tools in his toolbox that you could leverage. David Gusta out of Kentucky, I think he put up the most bench reps out of the defensive tackles at the combine this year. Cole Brevard out of Texas. If you could get Cole Brevard in decent shape, man, I mean, he could be really something. I like Cole Brevard a lot. Travis Shaw is another one out of Texas that is another gigantic individual. And then 2 other guys that I haven't seen anybody talk about at all, and they are definitely UDFAs, but Kevin Jobity Jr. out of Syracuse, and get ready for an absolute butcher of a name coming up here. Olasunkanmi Anguloya out of FIU. I did not say that correctly at all, but go check them out. So point being that there's a ton of defensive tackles that I like later on in the draft, particularly on day 3. So if it is a position that we really feel like we need to plug somebody into, then I think it's kind of like the Darius Alexander exercise of last year. Of you get somebody in the mid round there, like probably the top of the 4th, and then you plug them in and we see what we got. But I wouldn't be opposed to waiting, much like the interior of the offensive line, to day 3. We've got 4 picks between the 5th and 6th rounds, and you could take 2 defensive tackles and 2 offensive linemen right there. Hopefully you hit on one of them, and then the other one can be a solid depth piece for you. And that at least builds a little bit more depth, particularly at positions where you're going to have a ton of turnover from a contract perspective in the next year or two, and you need to add more pieces. So everybody looking for premier talent in the trenches, it's like, okay, fine, but that doesn't solve the depth issue.
Right. And Smelk just brought up the fact that something that John and I were talking about the other day is the contracts for everybody on the Giants interior offensive line are up after this year. All the centers, all the guards, nobody's under contract after this year. So there's going to be a massive turnover on the interior of the Giants line.
For the defensive line, does Xavier Harris's off the field stuff take him off any consideration? It does. Okay. Okay.
Not even considering him. I liked him when I started the process because he's kind of like the Dion Walker last year, just a gargantuan individual, you know? And it's like, okay, cool. I could get him on day 3. Like, why not? Let's see what we get out of him, and then find out about the off-field stuff. And it's just like, no shot. And Harbaugh is not going to tolerate that. I think that's like evident with the James Hudson execution. You know what I mean? It's just like, we don't have time for that. We want guys that love football. They're dedicated to football. They're good guys on and off the field. Character has always been kind of a primary thing for this organization as an overarching theme. And I think it's going to be even more relevant under Harbaugh and the new regime that they've built.
All right. Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say real quick on Mansour's height, because we spoke a lot about him. We shouldn't say too much, but do you have any concerns about his length?
No concerns at all about any of his physical attributes.
Okay.
All right. Perfect there. So, all right. So on the defensive line, there we kind of a lot of people lump edge in, and we had a hard time when we were doing our outside linebackers or linebackers in general and edge. I considered the edge to be more of the rush guys, but it could also be the 5 technique guys, which a lot of them, you don't really play that traditional 3-4 anymore. In fact, most teams, they're either playing an outright 4-man line or they're just going with 2-man line with really deep stand-up defensive ends, and then a mix of linebackers and or safeties playing in the box. It's a really an old school Rams defense from years ago, back in the late 80s, when they would go the 2 large defensive linemen, the stand-up guys, Kevin Green being one of them on the outside. That's kind of the defense most teams play right now. So for the Giants, we've got a couple of guys on the team right now that we don't really know kind of how they're using them at edge. You've got Kayvon, which we don't know if he's going to make it even to the season. That's still to be determined. If he makes it through the season. And then behind him, you've got a Chauncey Golston, which is he edge? Is he a defensive end? Are they going to try him as a defensive tackle? So there is actually room, amazingly enough, for more of a traditional defensive end edge guy who can play the run on this team. There's actually room for that. Of those guys, are any of those defensive linemen in this draft that you think I wouldn't mind seeing them put him in that group?
Yeah. Top of that list is Danny Dennis Sutton out of Penn State. I think he's going to go a lot higher than people are thinking. We would have to spend our 2nd round pick on him. I wouldn't be flabbergasted if he snuck into the end of the 1st round. I don't know why he's not being talked about more. Like, did his production potentially slightly fall off in this last season? You could make that argument, but you throw on his tape. If you want like the old school classic defensive end, his physical attributes, his play style, everything around that kind of fits that mold. Derek Moore out of Michigan is a guy that I wasn't too familiar with going into this process. Danny Dennis Sutton almost came out last year, so I was a little bit familiar with him coming out of that program, and I liked him a good bit then. But Derek Moore out of Michigan, fantastic at the Senior Bowl, and showed up when his number was called. He's got a good blend of a lot of different traits. So I think he's somebody that you could consider as well if we're talking about a little bit on the earlier side. Again, this is where not having a third round pick, really swift kick in the groin. But on day 3, some of the guys I like that fit the mold of what you're talking about, a Max Llewellyn out of Iowa is a guy who, they've been pumping out some solid defensive line talent. There's Logan Guy, who was a defensive tackle that I liked. I believe it was last year, 2 years ago. Lucas Van Ness. Like, there's been a few of them. And Max Llewellyn is a guy who's got a lot of upside there. Ethan Burke out of Texas, mammoth individual. And is he a little bit raw? And is he going to be a full-on starter for you? Not necessarily, but we're talking about, 5th, 6th round guys at this point that, you get any level of production and contribution out of would certainly be helpful. And then Mason Rieger out of Wisconsin is a guy I've been hyping up a ton. A little bit smaller by comparison to Max Llewellyn and Ethan Burke, but man, tenacious off the edge. He's dealt with injuries throughout his career a little bit, but the productivity, the DNA, I mean, he is everything that Harbaugh would want out of a defensive end, and taking a late round stab on him. He's proven that he can play standing up or with his hand in the dirt. He's got good bend to him. He's got good speed to him. Loves football. I love his energy on the field. That's one of the biggest things for me on the defensive side of the ball, is the energy that they bring, because we lack a lot of energy on our defense right now. Nobody is really like stepping up. If you go back to the old days when we were winning Super Bowls, there was so much energy. I mean, they were doing like the ball-in thing. You know what I mean? Like, they were just vibes on the defense, and we haven't had that in so long. So I really would like to see a lot more vibes, guys. And then one undrafted free agent, if you want to take a look that deep, is Niles King out of San Diego State. Go check him out.
There was a good discussion on Big Blue Kickoff Live with Paul Dottino, Matt Sytak, and somebody from Texas, and they were talking about Burke, and they were talking about your guy Anthony Hill. They were talking about DJ Campbell on the offensive line. There were
Malik Muhammad. They were hyping up a good
Muhammad. Yeah, that was a really good discussion.
Yep, I agree.
There's one outside guy I want to mention real quick, mainly because I believe it's Lindy's draft guide. They have this little line. I'm going to paraphrase because I'm not looking at it right at the moment. And what it said, I won't say who it is until after I've said it, but I want, when I get done with it, what player currently on the Giants does this sound like? So it does the write-up about him, right? It's got all the good stuff about him. It says, but one concern, he seems to be more noise, more bark in the backfield than he actually seems to be bite, where he doesn't get a lot of sacks. A lot of commotion, but not a lot of result. As soon as I read that, I'm thinking, Jesus, am I reading a draft guide for Kayvon Thibodeau? Because that is the biggest thing about Thibodeau that I've always felt, is he gets in the backfield, but doesn't close. You can go back in 23 against the Jets in that goddamn stupid overtime game that we somehow could not win because Tommy DeVito was only allowed to just run the ball the entire time for the game. Thank you, Tyrod Taylor, for getting hurt every time you stepped on the field. But throughout his career with the Giants, he's been the almost guy. Almost made that huge play. Almost was there. Well, this is about Keldrick Falk. How do you feel about Keldrick Falk? A guy who's about 6'5", about 270, really big kind of guy on the outside, a very traditional. You don't want him dropping into coverage, that's for sure. But he's not a pure pass rusher either. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he's one that's probably dropped the most since the beginning of the process, because he was a surefire mocked in the top 10 just based off of his physical traits early on in the process, and the amount of holes that have been poked in him as a potential player in the NFL. He might as well be Swiss cheese at this point. So I don't really feel any type of way on him. He's one that I haven't spent a ton of time looking at, to be honest with you, because I just don't see a scenario where he ends up being a Giants pick. And I try to focus on what I think. We're not taking him at 5. Sure. Even in a trade down, we're not going to take him. If he fell to the top of the second, could you make a case to potentially take him Sure. But is it a dire need? Like that still kind of goes back to my argument around the trenches earlier, where I'd rather add more pieces later on um, than somebody like that, because there's going to be some sort of player, be it if we skip corner or linebacker. I think corner and linebacker are kind of the two that I've always been focused on the most for rounds 1 and 2, because I think that those positions, there is a drop off in terms of the talent and regarding like a plug and play caliber player, whether you want to go Sonny Styles in the first or Mansour Delane in the first. Like those would be the two picks I'd want in the first as it sits today. And then if we stay at 5, and then in the second round, there's a plethora of different cornerbacks that you could choose from. There's a plethora of different linebackers you could choose from. But Keldrick Falk, I haven't looked at him much because I don't think it's realistic, and B, have seen so many people bashing him over the course of like the last couple of months, and it gets worse and worse as we're going. And I follow enough content that you kind of like watch the ebb and flow of the stocks of all these various players as you're going through the months leading up to the draft. And if somebody is crashing and burning as hard as Keldrick Falk, I'm not going to prioritize trying to take a look at him, particularly when I don't think it's realistic. But I do need to go back and check it out, because the way he's now, we're at a point where there could be a scenario where he falls to you at the top of the second. And if that happens, then I might consider it, but I got to go do more homework on him. I just never thought that that was a potential reality until probably like the last week and a half.
Yeah, he just got bad mouthed by, it was Lance or somebody again on with Schmelk the other day. They brought him up and they just said amazing tools, doesn't do anything on the field. You know, the productivity play, you know, one of those
looks like Tarzan plays.
Yeah,
like
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah.
This question's been up for a while because I know this is near and dear to your heart about the offensive line. I know you feel, which matches what the Ravens have done, and that you feel that they can address the offensive line later in this draft.
Absolutely. I think there is so much, excuse me, offensive line talent on day 3. And yes, if we feel like we need a premier right guard and we're not going to sign a free agent and all that kind of stuff, then does it make sense to take a right guard with the second round pick? 100%. Are there going to be solid options there for you to take at the top of the second round? 100%. Going back to the issue of depth, future state on the offensive line, I would rather load up, and like you're alluding to, Eric, the Ravens had a tendency to do this, multiple day 3 offensive line picks. You look at this picture we were talking about at the beginning of the program here, a lot of those guys were not premier picks. You know what I mean? They were day 3 undrafted free agent types. So I do think that there is a lot of opportunity on day 3 each and every year on the offensive line, but this year even more so. So if you want me to run through some names with you, I certainly can. So we'll do center, guard, and then tackle, just to like kind of keep it cohesive. But on the center position, a lot of speculation around John Michael Schmitz. I believe he's in the last year of his contract. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct.
So what are we doing there? And can people kind of moonlight as a center if he gets hurt, whatever, like we did last year? Sure. But is there a long-term solution in play? No, not currently. So Logan Jones out of Iowa, we'll see how high he goes. He could be a third rounder, but he could fall to day 3. I've seen him as low as like the 6th round in some mocks. So I think that he is probably the top of the heap for me there. Sam Hecht out of Kansas State is a solid guy. Jake Slaughter out of Florida. Pat Coogan out of the Championship Indiana organization. A little bit older prospect, but strong as they come. Just tried, true kind of guy. Good vocal veteran leader. Would not be upset about Pat Coogan. Jaeger Burton is a
for Coogan. Do you feel he's definitely a center, or do you have more guard capability?
I think a lot of these guys can flex across the interior of the offensive line. Probably the centers to guard easier than the guards to center, but There are a lot of tackles that I think are actually guards at the next level in this
Sure.
year's class. So a lot of the offensive line talent does offer position versatility, which is particularly a need for the Giants when there's absolutely no depth, and we have a lot of injuries.
And overall, you said this back in January too. You thought this was a really good center group.
Yeah. Yeah, and I stand by that. A lot of people were bashing the center class early on, but when I looked at it, I was like, I don't know why everybody's so against it. But yeah, so Yeager Burton, guy out of Kentucky. Love Yeager. I've talked about Yeager a lot. James Brockermeyer out of Miami, undersized, but dude, if he was like 3 inches taller and like 20 pounds heavier, he would be going so much higher. I think he was a former wrestler or something like that. NFL bloodlines. His dad played, or his dad at least played in college. I'd have to go back and look if he was in the NFL or not, but proven guy, played in a national championship. He gets no love because he's undersized, and he's not Willie Lampkin undersized. You know what I mean? But like him a lot. And then some later guys that you probably haven't heard as much about. Jaron Camp out of Utah. Go check him out. Everybody's infatuated with Caleb Lemieux and Spencer Fano, but go take a look at Jaron Camp. Nick Dawkins out of Penn State has been getting a little bit more buzz in the last week or so. And then a guy that I really like out of a smaller school, Noah Fensky out of Southern Illinois. Those are kind of the center prospects that I have my eye on. And
what do you think about Trey Zune moving into center?
Not against it. I have him as a guard.
Okay.
But he's one of those that some people have him as a tackle, so he's kind of in that Marcus Bowe conversation of, can he play all three positions on the offensive line? Sure, you got to get him in camp and see where your needs kind of fit and where he feels the most comfortable. One of the things that Dave T taught me years and years ago is trying to switch somebody from one side of the offensive line to the other is incredibly difficult. And the analogy he uses, trying to wipe your ass with the other hand. And it has always stuck with me, man, because it is, and as much as we can speculate, it's like a guard, you could put him on any side. He's a guard. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think, particularly for rookies, it's as easy of a transition as we might speculate that it could be. Now, is it impossible to do? No, not at all. But at the same time, it might be more trying than you think. So the side of the line versus snapping the ball, if they can snap the ball, you can learn how to snap the ball. John Michael Schmitz doesn't even snap the ball correctly in a lot of people's eyes. You know what I mean? He's got that crazy old school grip or whatever the hell he's doing. Speculation.
And Zune's biggest drawback is he's 6'6", but he has 32-inch arms. So he's shorter arms with a taller guy does allow guys to get into him a little bit easier. That's the push why a lot think he'll move inside to guard or center. I see him listed as a center in a number of different locations, and I've seen people talk about him as a center move. So it'll be interesting to see where he does fall because he's got talent.
And he's another guy that could go day 2, could fall to the end of day 3. He is all across the board, but had a pretty good combine, if I recall. Trey Zune is kind of on the guard list. Bo Stevens is I love Iowa offensive linemen. I would just take every Iowa offensive lineman every single year and be completely content. They put him out. So Bo Stevens is on my list. Inez Cooper, probably more of like a third rounder. I think he's being slept on.
He's a massive dude. He's big.
And on the show that Eric was talking about with Paul Dottino, Matt Sytek, that they released yesterday, they went through a bunch of different schools with like the main media person at these institutions. And they had the guy on from Miami, and they talked about Cooper and how he was 400 pounds in high school, and he has lost weight and he is trimmed down. But he was an immediate plug and play guy for them, and he's been uber productive on that offensive line. Jaden Roberts another large individual out of a premier program in Alabama. DJ Campbell is a guy that I like a lot. A little bit short. You could say potentially undersized, but dude, probably like some of the most broad shoulders and like big chests that I've seen. He looks like a bouncer at a nightclub. You know what I mean? And I
Nice.
could just see him ragdolling people. So I
And
like DJ Campbell.
yeah, and just on quick on DJ Campbell, they mentioned the guy that was on from Texas yesterday, which I always like to hear this offensive line. They said his personality is the kind of guy you want on an offensive line, that he barks a lot. He doesn't get dumb penalties, but if you want sort of like an enforcer on the offensive line, he was saying DJ Campbell was like one of those guys. I think he said somebody asked Manning about who's the guy on the team that you wouldn't want to mess with, and he said DJ Campbell. So if you're looking for an attitude player, Campbell's, and I think he fits the Harbaugh mode too.
Yeah, I agree. I think he would go higher if he wasn't like 6'3",
Yeah.
But he's like just on like that borderline low side for a guard where you can absolutely be successful. But if you're looking at, like the Trey Zunes, some of these other guys that are 6'5", 6'6", whatever. I think that's the only knock you really have on DJ Campbell at this point. Armaj Reed Adams, Texas A&M, Febby Wee-Woo out of Oklahoma, Jeremiah Wright out of Auburn, Jalen Farmer out of Kentucky, Bill Schruth out of Notre Dame, Josh Braun out of Kentucky. Then I really like Caden Barnett. I did a little bit of a write-up on him on BBI when I did a mock draft. Absolute lunatic. I like him a good bit. Fernando Carmona out of Arkansas. Micah Pettis is a guy out of Florida State that was an offensive tackle that I don't think he would survive as an offensive tackle, so I would kick him into guard, but he is in the vein of like an Evan Neal type, a Mekhi Becton type, where he's just a Daniel Falele type. They're just huge, and he's not going to survive on the outside, but could you kick him in? And then if we're talking deep into the depths of undrafted free agents, but I do think there's a lot of value right here. Tyler Doty out of Buffalo, Tomas Rimick out of Virginia Tech, Josh Getsky out of Illinois, Liam Brown out of Montana, Justin Pickett out of Duke, Henry Lupsky out of Nebraska, and then Damian George Jr. out of Florida. Those are all guys that you should check out that I think could be 7th round, probably more undrafted free agent types, unless teams have, a much higher grade on them. But those are some of the interior offensive linemen that I really like on day 3. And we can go into tackles if you want. But
yeah, and Damian George is another 6'6", 350-pound dude. He's a huge dude. Not to pat somebody on the back, but 2 shows ago I did mention Inez Cooper as a guy because of the size, because of the physicality that this team, a Greg Roman team, wants for an offensive run game piece, wants physical, smash into you kind of run blocking guys. They'll get by with the pass blocking limitations by just pure size and the way you have a mobile quarterback. And I think that's some of the places the Giants are going to look. I don't see them going undersized guys, 6'2", 6'3", guys who are maxed out at 310, 315. Probably not the guys that they're going to bring in to play guard.
And that's a knock on DJ Campbell. But
yeah. And I guess after you spoke, I was thinking, well, yeah, he doesn't have the height that the Ravens want at guard normally. Too, so, yeah. Real quick, because I did get an email from somebody who wanted me to ask you about Lander Barton, but we also have a question here about Keshawn Elliott. I know you already talked about the linebackers, but I wanted to knock off those 2 questions too. So any quick thoughts on Keshawn Elliott and Lander Barton?
Yeah, Elliott, haven't spent too much time on him. He hasn't really stood out to me, but I'll talk about like more of the day 3 linebackers, like Jake Golday out of Cincinnati.
Nice.
I'm not as high on him as others. Like a lot of people have him in the tier as Jacob Rodriguez, and I don't think they're remotely close to each other. But Jake Golday is a guy that in the 4th round, could I see it? Sure. There's Lander Barton, which I believe was the email that you got,
Yeah.
Eric, out of Utah. So we'll talk about him real quick. I don't think a lot of people know this, but Lander Barton was also playing like H-back tight end at Utah. So kind of a Travis Hunter style player, Lander Barton is. And I like him, but he would be deeper on day 3 for me because he almost looked better catching the ball than he did as a linebacker. And I don't know if his play speed is going to be up to snuff for the NFL. A guy that I really like that is in that same sort of tier is Jack Kelly at a BYU. So flip to a different Utah school. Jack Kelly is a maniac. I love Jack Kelly. I would love Jack Kelly in this organization. I do think that he is kind of a Harbaugh style player. And I think he's closer to the mold of a Jacob Rodriguez than a Golday or a Barton.
How do you feel about? I'm sorry. How do you feel about Caleb
Elam's-Orr?
Yeah. How do you feel about
TCU?
Him? Yes.
I like Caleb. He was coming up. He was. I got Jimmy Rolder would be a guy ahead of him. Caleb's Elam's-Orr is an interesting one because I think he's more of like an outside backer than a middle backer, but good in coverage, good speed, good metrics at like the combine and whatnot. And the production for Caleb Elam's-Orr might have the most tackles in anybody. I don't actually know the statistics well enough to like tell you this, but his are through the freaking roof. He has been so productive at TCU that, yeah, I think he's definitely worth a look. And he was a guy that started deeper on day 3. I remember talking to Rick Saratella about him on my show at one point, and he was like a 6th round guy. And now I've started to see Caleb Elam's-Orr 4th round. So he's one that's on the ascent as more and more people are talking and getting familiar with him. Carson Sherrar out of Iowa is a guy that isn't getting enough notoriety as far as I would be concerned. I have another program that pumps out decent linebacker talent. Then you get into some of the more undersized guys like a Bryce Bector out of Oregon, who had a fantastic Senior Bowl, and Aiden Fisher out of Indiana. Owen Heineke, I think he's still trying to fight to go back to school at Oklahoma. So whether he comes out or not remains to be seen. Wade Woodaz is a guy that like some people talk about, but doesn't get enough love out of Clemson as far as I'm concerned. And then if you get into the later round guys, one that I really like, I was telling Eric this the other day, Jake Kuwach out of Miami of Ohio. I absolutely love Jake Kuwach. Go check him out. Wes Weeks is a guy at a LSU that has a ton of production, and I'm not sure exactly what knocks him so low on a lot of people's boards. But even if he's just going to come in as like a UDFA special teamer for me, I like the energy that he brings to the table. Wesley Bisanthe out of Miami is a guy that I like as a UDFA potentially as well. And then the deep cut at the linebacker position, Marco Notoriani. Don't think I said that correct, and I should because I'm Italian, but Boise State. Go check out Marco. Good size to him, good production at a decent program in Boise State. So that's the thing, man, is like we just rattled off how many linebackers on day 3, and that's where how bad do you need that linebacker? Because if Edmonds is your guy for the next couple of years and he's like your stalwart, and then you have McFadden, and then you have like another McFadden level person that could potentially surpass McFadden, that's enough to get by. You know what I mean? Versus Styles and Edmonds, and then Edmonds is going to be on his way out, and then you have some depth there, but it depends on or Rodriguez or whatever, but depends on how this organization is prioritizing the linebacker position. But if the Ravens are any barometer for us to go off of, they prioritize it pretty heavily.
We've got 3 questions on Pregnon, who I don't think you're as high on as some people, but I don't want to put words in your mouth again.
Pregnon, I see the arguments to be made for him at the top of the 2nd round. I think there's a lot to like about him. I worry about his play speed at the next level. He's a little bit older. Everybody likes to harp on age. That was a big knock on John Michael Schmitz when he came out. Oh, 24. Breakdown's 24. He's a road grader. He's been around, been very productive. I think he is the type of offensive guard that Harbaugh would like. I would not be mad at Pregnon being the pick. But when I put on his tape, there's a little bit of lethargy, like he's lethargic in his play tape. And it's not to say that he's not tenacious and like a bulldozer, but the play speed is one that concerns me. And Oregon, they play some good teams, but the caliber, when I'm watching like his cut-ups, he's bullying a lot of players that are on teams where I'm not really that impressed. Does he have some good tape against some good competition? Sure, but I don't know. Is he worth a top of the second round pick? Sure. But he's just not a guy that I'm over the moon with, and I have a little bit of hesitation about. So I'm kind of indifferent on Pregnon at this point. I don't hate him. I don't love him. I'm fine with him.
And you and I talked about McCoy yesterday. And what were your thoughts on him for everybody too?
Yeah, I mean, Jermon McCoy, there's a lot to like there. It's the injury bug, and I can't justify damaged goods in the first round. You know what I mean? It's just so if we traded all the way down into like the 20s or something and he was still sitting there, would I take a snap on him because of the upside and the proven productivity that he's had when he's been on the field? Yes. If he wasn't hurt, then he's right in the conversation with Mansour Delane. I'm sure a lot of people would have him above Mansour Delane. That's kind of where it started out in the process, right? Was McCoy was still up there even with the injury issues. And then everybody's like, he didn't participate at the combine, and it's kind of like the Cooper DeJean scenario from a couple of years ago. And then Cooper fell into the 20s. Eagles grabbed him. He ended up being a really good player. So I don't think that he's not going to be successful in the league. But if you couple the reality of him being a feasible pick for the Giants, I certainly would not. I mean, the pushback that we get about Delane at 5, no shot McCoy at 5. If you trade back in the first round and, it's like him or Avion Terrell, he probably has more upside than Avion Terrell, but Terrell out of Clemson is also a really good player that isn't being talked about enough. Like, I don't know why people aren't talking about Terrell, because it goes, there's Delane, then there's McCoy. As far as I'm concerned, then there's Terrell. Everybody skips Terrell, and then we go right to the Colton Hood, Chris Johnson, Brandon Cease, like that whole grouping. And I don't know why we skip over Avon Terrell, because I think he's going to be a really good player, and I'd have him kind of neck and neck with Jermod McCoy in like the middle back half of the first round. But the injury history with Jermod McCoy, I just can't wrap my head around allocating that much draft capital to damaged goods, even though the upside potential and the productivity when he's been healthy is astronomical.
So I want to be careful because we're going to push 2 hours here shortly. So let's jump around real quick. We're just going to hit a couple things. If you have a last question you want to get in, because I'm going to keep this to 12 minutes. We're
going to keep it tight.
We're 11. You're keeping it tight. Nice. We blew out the seams. I'm going to tighten it back up. So, it's the fat guy after dinner. We've loosened the belt, but now this is it.
We're already not keeping it tight, I might add.
No dessert. Yeah. I'm gonna throw out some names of random positions though, but I'm gonna do one because I already know that you like him, at least to some degree. At least I believe I know. And I do. I also like him. So I'm going to jump to the running back position, and I'm going to go with Randall out of Clemson.
Oh, yeah.
Your thoughts on him? Because, again, a guy who brings some size, if the Giants don't go, add that love at 5, they're going to add a running back somewhere, though, whether it's an undrafted free agent or as Jay draft him low. Your thoughts on Randall?
I really like the upside of Randall. converted to running back specifically this last year full time. He came into Clemson as a wide receiver. Then he dabbled a little bit between wide receiver and running back initially in that second year. And then they fully moved him over to running back. Incredible size, incredible physical tools. I like his vision as a ball carrier. I like the fact that he can bowl people over. He's got incredible hands having been a receiver. It's basically like Tyrone Tracy, but if you made him, like he ate a mushroom in Mario, you know what I mean? And bulked up.
Nice.
So it's I really do think that there is tremendous upside with Adam Randall. Where I'm kind of getting concerned about him was he was the guy that nobody was talking about that was kind of like tucked away, and you could easily get him in the 6th round. And now it's like, dude, is he going to go in the 4th? Because he just brings such a unique blend of physical tools, vision, productivity to the table. I could see him going much earlier on day 3 than a lot of people are anticipating. In a draft class where I do like a lot of depth on day 3 at the running back position, I'll get into some names in a second, but the second day running backs, it's like you got Price from Notre Dame, and then you got to like either Mike Washington out of Arkansas or Emmett Johnson out of Nebraska or one of the 2 Penn State guys enough to pull the trigger on day 2. Like those are the only guys that I'd really be looking at on day 2. And I could see a couple, if not a few of them, falling into day 3, But Jamari Taylor out of UVA is another guy, a little bit smaller by comparison, but I like him a good bit. Kalon Black out of Indiana, combine snub, but very productive at that program. Jam Miller was not a combine snub, blew out the combine, got a pretty heavy dose of the stock increase. And a good running back coming out of that program in Alabama. And then some of the larger guys that I like that I've talked about before and would pound the table for as a round 6 guy, assuming that Adam Randall is no longer available. CJ Donaldson out of Ohio State, Chip Trayanum out of Toledo. Jaden Odd is one who's got like a lot of warts, but proved productive at the Senior Bowl, good size to him. So potentially take a stab on him. And then some later UDFA types at the running back position that I think you should take a look at. TJ Harden out of SMU and Sam Scott out of Wyoming.
Nice. Very nice.
Now, you and I had also talked about that you're looking at the wide receiver room right now at the Giants in terms of adding somebody with some height. So you have not been focused on the Smurfs, the smaller guys, but the guys that would be in sort of an X receiver like the Carnell Tates of the world and the other ones. What are the wide receivers that you'd be looking at if they were to go that route on day 2 or day 3 that stand out to you too? Would that have size?
Yeah, day 2, it's like Chris Brazzell, Denzel Boston are kind of like the guys that make a ton of sense to me there. I think it would be a little rich to go for the Jacoby Lane, Malachi Fields horde at that point. I think those guys are really kind of prime time in round 3. If one of them slipped to round 4, I'd be all over it. After them, it would be the Bryce Lance, Ted Hurst experiments, 2 guys with good size, great speed, smaller schools, but can you get something out of them? They got a lot of upside. I think both of them would be interesting. Then you get into the Deshaun Stribling out of Ole Miss, the Eric McAllister out of TCU, the CJ Daniels out of Miami, Heidenreich out of Navy, smaller. But if I were looking at a smaller guy later on day 3, Heidenreich or Wheatchin out of Iowa would be the 2 guys that I like there. And then I'm going to rattle off some big boys for you that are like, late day 3 UDFA types, but try to keep up. Daniel Subkowskiewicz out of Illinois State. Go check him out. Josh Cameron out of Baylor. There's Chase Roberts out of BYU. There's a couple of the Georgia guys that, there's always Georgia wide receivers that are later on that like got lost in the depth chart, didn't get a lot of production time, whatever. Collie Young and Noah Thomas. J. Michael Sturdivant out of Florida is somebody that I don't know why we're not talking about him more, but he's really solid. Tyron Montgomery out of John Carroll absolutely lit it up through the pre-draft process and is kind of fallen off the radar for whatever reason. And then the deep UDFA types, Danavian McCulley. I think he could actually get drafted out of Michigan. You go pop him on, and he's like 6'5", solid possession receiver, very skinny. Needs to add some weight, but like him a lot. Incredible couple names on these next two. Joe Manjack the fourth. Okay. at a TCU. Dude, I love Joe Manjack. Go check out Joe Manjack, the fourth, no less. Omega Blake out of Arkansas. These are all big body guys. Go check out Omega Blake. Romello Brinson, not as big as those other ones at SMU, but Romello Brinson is a really solid, kind of reminds me of like a Anquan Bolden. Probably not going to be nearly as good as Anquan Bolden, so relax before you get freaking out about that. But solid possession guy, has some upside, sure hands, all that kind of stuff. Trond Grizel out of UCal. Love him. Don't know why. A lot of these guys I liken them to Jake Bobo a few years back when Jake Bobo came out of UCLA. I was screaming from the rooftops about Jake Bobo. And then he's been decently productive for the Seahawks. And then the Jags tried to sign him. And Jake Bobo's making millions of dollars now as a nobody. You know what I mean? Brady Boyd out of Utah State is another one. And then a guy that I haven't spent enough time on, but has more 30 visits than a lot of other prospects at this position. Trevor Pena out of Penn State. Not the biggest guy, but if you go look at the visit tracker, I would say Trevor Pena and then Travis Burke, the offensive tackle out of Memphis.
Yeah.
They're meeting with half the league.
Including the Giants. Burke met with the Giants. Yeah.
And Pena, I believe, also met with the Giants.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, like those two guys, I don't know why everybody's visiting with them, but they're two names that could go potentially a good bit higher than a lot of people think.
All right, so since we are going to keep it tight, I asked this question at the last Saturday's live show. If there is a position of need that gets ignored in this draft, which one do you think is most likely to get ignored?
Now, when we say ignored, are we saying ignored in the way that it is like a late day 3 UDFA, or it's a completely obsolete, we do not add a player at that position?
It's hard to predict so let's just stick to the draft. Like, they don't draft a guy at that position, period.
At a position of need. Man.
Giants are calling saying, don't give this away.
I know, right? I would probably say it's either running back or wide receiver. It's one of those, you know, because there's enough bodies in that room, and they signed 2 wide receivers. You still got the Jalen Hyatt experiment. You still got all right. But Darius Slayton, like, you have a lot of bodies, you know, and unless you're going to if they were going to cut some of these guys, they would have done it already, as far as I'm concerned. But you can only carry so many. And then they got like the Bryce Ford Wheaton. I think he's still hanging around somewhere. Bo Collins still hanging around somewhere, you know. So there's so many guys in the wide receiver room, and they signed 2 free agents there. So if I had to bet money on it, it's probably wide receiver.
Okay.
I think that's what you said, John, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was thinking. And the last thing too is, like, just because the way things fall, they have needs. Now, again, they're not always going to draft to need, and I get that. But once you start getting in the middle of rounds, you don't just go and I'm just going to take an athlete. You're taking guys that can legitimately make your team at positions that have holes in them. You spend free agency to fill some depth, but in reality, a lot of what they've done is to get you by for a year. A lot of these guys are not long-term, so you're looking to build long-term. I'm with you. I think the lines are going to be size guys, big guys that are going to come in the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds where they're picking there. I think they're going to try to hit home runs in the 1st round and possibly top of the 2nd round of guys who can not only make the team, but be immediate contributors to that team. And when you start doing that, wide receiver seems to be the one that has the least, because Isaiah Likely suddenly makes that slot piece more his thing. He can be the inline, he can jump out, he can play slot. So do I need another receiver? Wandell's position in some ways is going to be eaten up by some of the tight ends. So that second guy, Darius Slayton, is still sitting there. Whether I want him to be there or not, he still is. And you start looking, you go, do they want to spend that kind of capital on a number two when it doesn't seem to be the focal point of what they're trying to do this season? So I think wide receiver is the one that gets ignored.
Particularly if they're going to have more of an identity in the run game.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
If they're going to emphasize that, and then tight end, you got, I mean, everybody was waiting for the emergence of Theo Johnson last year. I was saying we need Tyler Warren because I think Theo Johnson's going to be a better number 2 tight end than a number 1. I don't think you can rely on him as a number 1. We add Isaiah Likely to the mix. So are they going to focus a bit more like Neighbors, Likely run game, and then wide receiver, it's just like you need somebody who can catch the ball somewhere in the middle there? I could see that being a proper stopgap for a year if that's the identity that they want to go after. That's the toughest part about all this, is not knowing once we get a year under our belt and see their offense. I mean, Harbaugh saying that this offense is not going to be anything like what it's been before. They are rebuilding the offense completely for this organization specifically, for this team specifically. So there's no way you can properly identify what it's going to be or how they're going to prioritize it or whatever. So we'll just have to see.
I mean, I don't think we'd be shocked. I don't think it's heading in that direction, but I don't think we'd be shocked if they take Carnell Tate or if they took a receiver at the top of the second round.
I wouldn't be shocked if they took Tate or if they took Love, man. That's the thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it just, all these things are plausible. We still, it's another year around the sun where the Giants have a bazillion holes and we could go a bazillion ways. You know what I mean? And until that changes, we're going to keep playing this game. But it's even harder this year because we lack the information around the identity and the scheme.
Yeah. All right. So with that, real quick, once again, just whatever you have coming up, let folks know where they're going to be able to see your stuff. And again, I know it's small social media presence, but you do have one. Let everybody know where they can follow you.
Yeah, at Scouts Honor Show on the Twitter X machine, and then the Scouts Honor podcast. Check that out. We've got all kinds of guests coming up. We're going to have Schmelk back on. We're going to have Rick Saratella back on. We're going to have Bobby Skinner. We're going to have Cy. We're going to have License Plate Guy. We're going to have Paul Dottino. I mean, there's a laundry list of folks. I know I'm forgetting some right now, but there's going to be a gauntlet of content for me in the month of April. It's exciting times. It's draft month. If you want to ask me questions or whatever, hit me up. I'm always down to chat draft, as Eric will tell you. And you can see from I don't think I've done a show in recent memory that's gone under 2 hours, to be quite honest with you.
Nice.
I could do this for another 2 hours if you wanted to. We only got through so many positions, but always great being on with you guys. Appreciate you having me on. Always fun to talk draft, and anything I could do to keep the content moving forward with BBI, happy to do it. And if there's one thing you take away from this show today, it's the fact that Eric Scott would.
and they're gonna live this one down. Oh,
no, you're not, dude. That was incredible.
I am just seriously glad you didn't say the wood part right after Mansoor, because that would have been a really weird combination. But anyway, with that, Dave,
we have to go now. We have to go now.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you coming on, and we're gonna catch you again real soon, bud.
Cool. Thanks, guys. See you. Have a good weekend.
All right. So, Eric, we're gonna wrap this up because it went.
Oh yeah,
long.
we went over.
Went long. So, folks, appreciate you on a Saturday morning. You guys are awesome coming in, and we're gonna try to keep doing more. I'm looking forward to draft stuff. We had fun last year doing the draft, especially once the trade started happening, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. Constantly updating the Shedeur Sanders drop as each team who needed a quarterback, it went through, and people were just losing their minds over it. It was hysterical. So,
and Cy popping in made that too. He kept back in, so that was great. That
was fun. But so like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I really do appreciate it. And unless we've got anything else, I'm gonna call it, and we'll catch you again real soon.
Hey BBI fans, elevate your style with the all-new Inside BBI merchandise. From super soft tees to cozy hoodies and mugs for your morning brew.